Hi, this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. This week, we're offering 5 conversations from episode 20, our review of drug development stories from the EASL Congress 2024 with Jörn Schattenberg, Naim Alkhouri, and Mazen Noureddin, plus from the vault, one of our wrap-up conversations from the EASL Congress 2023. This conversation centers largely around the Twin-cretins, a name Jörn coined for agents with GLP-1 agonist effect plus another incretin effect. Tirzepatide is a twin-cretin, is a GLP-GIP agent, while survodutide and the agents discussed last year, pemvidutide and efinopegdutide, are also twin-cretins, but they are GLP-glucagons. Naim reviews results of the Tirzepatide late-breaker presentation. As expected, it showed high rates of MASH resolution, but Naim does not feel it completely answered the question whether an incretin-agonist can achieve significant fibrosis regression without a direct liver effect, since it relied on a completer analysis that treated 3 out of every 10 non-completers as successes, since the placebo rate was 30%. In ITT, that would have been 0 out of 10. Again, just to remember, glucagon has a direct effect on liver, GIP does not. So all this takes Naim back to the question of whether a GLP-GIP can have meaningful effect on fibrosis. He notes that Stephen believed firmly it could not, but that there's a paradox. Bariatric surgery can produce reduction in fibrosis. However, we don't know if that's because of the surgery or another factor having to do with weight. Naim notes that we might not need to wait long for an answer, however, since conclusive data will arrive later this year. Mazen follows with similar comments. He praises Tirzepatide's effect on weight loss and safety and would prescribe it now and can prescribe it now, but the completer analysis has not persuaded him to prescribe it to regress fibrosis where that's necessary, particularly given the lack of dose response in the data. He notes that, and I quote, "While I don't want to compare apples to oranges," end of quote, he is more confident that the glucagon effect found with survodutide, pemvidutide, and efinopegdutide. Jörn seems to agree. Finally, I ask what the impact on prescribing any of these agents is likely to be, given that some media in the U.S. are reporting that 1 out of 8 patients have been on semaglutide already. Naim shares data he compiled from the 85 patients for whom his practice prescriber is Meterome. Those numbers are not a lot different than what I described. During the episode, all of us kept comparing the negativity and virtual despondence of the 2019 to 2020 period described as the graveyard with what's described as today's gift shop of multiple modes of action, demonstrating clearly positive results. It's an exciting time for the field and for the patients. As I edited, I found myself thinking of Stephen's goal to put a big fat dent in fatty liver disease. We all can use this episode to gauge the size of Stephen's dent, and frankly, it's pretty damn big.
Mazen Noureddin.
Yeah, let's talk about Tirzepatide and survodutide, which was one of the biggest discussions. Then we moved to in my mind, the most efficacious seen in EASL, which is efruxifermin. But for fairness, it's 96 weeks data. So if anyone can discuss Tirzepatide and we can jump to survodutide, I think we can create a lot of discussions.
Roger Green.
You're doing my job and you picked my order. Very good. Go ahead, Naim.
Naim Alkhouri.
These are the, dual agonists. Now Jörn called them twin-cretins, right? Jörn, they don't target just GLP-1. So we know Tirzepatide is a GLP-1 GIP. Survodutide is a very exciting new medication with the new mechanism of action, which is GLP-1 and glucagon with direct effects on the liver. So with the Tirzepatide, we kind of knew they're going to hit big on MASH resolution. That was in the press release. We expected it to be as good, if not better, than semaglutide. And this is what they showed, that, very high rates of MASH resolution, especially with the higher dose Tirzepatide, very encouraging. The biggest question in my mind in the field now is, can you actually lead to fibrosis regression targeting GLP-1 plus minus GIP without any liver-directed mechanism of action? And the jury is out, and I would love to hear from Mazen and Jörn, but they presented the data. It looks like maybe there's a 20 to 25% delta from placebo on fibrosis regression. But the way they analyzed the data was interesting, because what they did, Roger, going back to this completer analysis, patients that did not have a repeat liver biopsy, typically we count them as non-responders, but they actually gave them a response rate similar to placebo, which was around 29%. So if you didn't have a second liver biopsy, they didn't say you didn't respond. They said, well, in the placebo arm, 30% responded. So if you had 10 non-completers, we're going to assume that 3 of them responded. So that was a unique way to do the analysis. And when it's all said and done, I'm still not very clear that they hit on fibrosis. This is my personal interpretation, if you want to compare it to how other data were analyzed. I think the question is, with longer duration, larger sample size, are we going to see it? Honestly, there are 2 camps. If you remember, Stephen was fully convinced that you will not hit on fibrosis regression with the GLP-1 or even GLP-GIP mechanism of action. But we know that with weight loss, whether it's with lifestyle intervention, whether it's with bariatric surgery, we see fibrosis regression. And this was a paradox. Why don't we see it improvement with GLP-1? I think that question will be settled once we have the ESSENCE readout. This is the semaglutide phase 3, and we'll see who was right. And there's a lot of mechanistic talk that we can get into now to say why maybe you will not see improvement with a GLP-1, but I think we don't have to speculate for much longer because the results will be available at the end of this year. So that's my take on the tirzepatide data.
Yeah, let me stick to the tirzepatide before we move to survodutide. It's a great drug with excellent weight loss. The GI side effects is like any others. We have great safety data. The drug is already on the market. Yet for hepatologists, as you said, especially when I see F3 patients, this is like what I need to rescue. I can give them weight loss drug, but I really need that fibrosis to regress. And eventually we need to move to the cirrhotic, which many of them, or almost 80% of the drugs, are moving toward that direction, fortunately for our patients. And maybe we should thank the regulators for having a path there so people can get faster approval, but yet also benefit our patients. But a couple of comments along the same line. Tirzepatide, you did not see a dose-dependent fibrosis improvement similar to what SEMA have shown in a phase 2. Now, the numbers are small. We need a bigger trial. It calls for a proper phase 3. In my mind, to be honest, if I compare, there were a lot of comparison between tirzepatide and survodutide, and I don't want to do that apple to oranges and trial to trials, but as a quick look, there was more dose-dependent improvements in fibrosis, improvement in the survodutide, and we'll talk about the analysis and how things were done in different trials. Thanks to you for mentioning the way they did analysis. I don't think they had statistical significance in ITT and tirzepatide in my mind, especially in the higher dose or the middle dose, maybe in the lower dose. So it was a bit hazy for me there. But again, I think with phase 3, proper phase 3 design with a dual, this one is GIP. I want to put 2 lines under GIP, not glucagon. There is potential story to improving fibrosis to be seen. I am more optimistic about the glucagon effect, which is survodutide, pemvidutide, the other also the product from Merck. And there's a lot of discussion, what's the right ratio not to see side effects, less dropout, and have that direct effect on the liver. So those are my quick comment on tirzepatide.
Jörn Schattenberg.
I think those are great points on the summary. And it's important to see that those mechanisms are comparable but different, and the study readouts are analyzed differently. I think Naim highlighted that excellently. So I'm just there's a good rationale to push these drugs as a metabolic regulator and look for fibrosis improvement down the line. The bet is still out whether in a phase 3 this is going to translate into histological benefit on the fibrosis side. I think we saw some very strong data suggestive of it, but if you do a more refined analysis of intention to treat, and that class of drug does have dropouts in patients that don't get the second liver biopsy and that do change doses on treatment drug, you use multiple of those doses. So that's an interesting aspect also of running these trials with the GI side effects, and patients won't tolerate the dose they're assigned to, and then you have to look into, are they then moved into a different lower dose category, or how are they analyzed? So there's some analysis has been done, actual treatment and planned treatment. So we haven't seen it to that extent in some of the other drugs that don't have the comparable GI side effects profiles.
So I had a thought and a question. I thought, Mazen, I'm glad you mentioned pemvidutide, and I think efinopegdutide is the Merck Hanmi drug, because as I understand it, they're also both GLP-glucagons, right?
Say it again, the Merck?
Efinopegdutide.
Good job, man. I have been trying that for the last year to say.
Okay, when I send you recipes, I'll send you that in phonetics. How's that? But I'm going to call it efinopegdutide.
I'll call it a day.
Efinopegdutide.
Let's call it efino. That's much easier.
Okay, yeah, but
Servo, efino, triz, and
But I haven't had a natural science course since high school, so the fact that I could pronounce it correctly gives me bonus points. In all seriousness, I was glad you mentioned that, because those were 2 of the big papers last year in Vienna, right? And those were their 2As, but they weren't looking at fibrosis. They were simply looking at NAS resolution and the element scores, and they did quite well, right? So when I saw the survodutide data, which I'm still learning to pronounce, servo data, thanks, Mazen, what I saw was it kind of consistent with the other 2 agents of comparable class, but now we had fibrosis data, and it was really exciting. So that was point 1. Point two, I saw somewhere, and it wasn't an academic study, that 1 out of every 8 Americans has been on Ozempic already. I mention that because I'm wondering how many patients who come to a hepatologist with fibrosis that needs to be treated will already either be on or have been on at least a GLP-1, and what that's going to do to affect A, the treatment patterns, and B, how we think about these drugs as we go through the process of getting them to market.
Roger, I can speak from our experience with resmetirom now because I just looked at our data. So we've done about 85 prescriptions. These are patients, again, coming to a hepatology clinic outside of clinical trials, so this is real world. And if you look at diabetics, up to 30% they're on a GLP-1 now. And if you look at non-diabetics, 1 out of 10 they've been exposed to a GLP-1. And all of these patients have NIT data at least suggesting that they have significant to advanced fibrosis. Granted, many of these GLP-1s are, older generation. They're not tirzepatide or semaglutide. Many of them have been on these for 2, 3, 5 years. So you're right. Some people are going to maybe lose initially some weight, plateau, and then the liver is going to go back to producing collagen and the fibrosis will progress.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of the conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the reviews section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmesh.com. Next week, Frank Taka and Luca Valenti from the EASD, EASL, EASO combination group will be joining us to discuss the updated clinical practice guidelines for Mazen. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.